Just ahead, Belgium becomes the first in the EU to recognize ecocide as an international crime, with hefty fines and possible jail time for acts against nature.
What we're talking about principally is putting in place a deterrent.
Oil production is a sticky business. Fossil fuel companies use a process meant to store CO2 to extract oil that's stuck to rocks.
To put it simply, it's a kind of buying the permit to pollute.
And a fight breaks out in Manhattan.
Don't touch him like that!
As environmentalists target organizations that shield oil and gas manufacturers.
It is time out for these insurance companies and these big banks funding these projects.
Just 2 degrees is on. Now.
We came here to be heard.
Fossil fuels is a joke!
Big news from Belgium. The country's decided to recognize ecocide as an international crime. It's the first member of the European Union to do so, setting an impressive precedent to tackle harmful actions against nature. Environmentalists have been trying to make this happen for a while now. One campaigner at Greenpeace said, quote, "A crime against nature is by definition a crime against all of us," and that the recognition of ecocide in criminal law is a, quote, "milestone in the recognition of nature's rights." I spoke with one of the organizations that led the campaign.
Walk us through the entire process, which I know has been a tough one for your organization. When did this all start and why?
Our international advocacy organization has been working since 2017 to highlight and to bring into prominence this concept of ecocide, which means the worst harm to nature, and ultimately to push for the criminalization of those harms. And that's something obviously we've been working on for some time, but it's a movement, it's an initiative, a legal initiative that has really picked up momentum in the last few years, so that over the last couple of years we have actually seen proposals of law on ecocide going into various different national parliaments. We've seen the EU discussing it and reaching political agreement to include it in EU law. And most recently, we've just seen the first European country include it in its penal code as an international level crime, and that's Belgium.
Under international law, Belgium already recognizes genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crime of aggression. Ecocide will now be the 5th. What actions exactly would this legislation apply to?
I think the best way to look at how ecocide may be applied in practice is to kind of look at the kinds of things that would have been averted had ecocide been in place. And that speaks to the fact that with criminal law, what we're talking about principally is putting in place a deterrent. So when we look at, there's sort of big oil spills like Deepwater Horizon that could have been prevented if the safety protocols had been followed. When we look at, for example, mass deforestation, or we look at the kinds of damages that we've seen in countries like Nigeria in terms of oil pollution and those kinds of things, we're talking about the big scale damages, that could be happening on Belgian soil or elsewhere. And Belgium recognizing these as being as serious, if you like, in their implication as things like genocide and war crimes.
The scope of this is really limited. Do you think that will deter polluters?
What's interesting is that what we've seen in combination with the developments that we've seen at the EU level, where in fact all EU countries will have to integrate ecocide level or crimes comparable to ecocide into their penal codes, what we're seeing is Belgium kind of leading the charge. I mean, when you talk about a limited scope, that's essentially because of the way that the Belgian jurisdiction is set up with regions and federal level. And this is done at the federal level. The regions will need to follow for it to have full effect in the country, across various different aspects of the environment. But they are going to have to bring themselves into line with the EU developments in any case. So what we're seeing here really, I suppose, is kind of the tip of the spear.
What would this mean for polluters?
It should mean that they will actually have very different discussions in their boardrooms before they engage in particular projects. And that ultimately is what we're aiming for. I mean, to use a very basic example, murder isn't a crime specifically to punish murderers. That's how it works. It's really a crime to prevent people killing each other. So it's a way of, when you've got a parameter like this in place, you're going to have very different conversations. Instead of, for example, the risk managers and the legal legal counsels in those big companies working out how they can sort of avoid fitting into a certain category. What they will actually have to start looking at is, what are we doing on the ground, and is it likely to create this level of harm? And that, of course, then gears towards the behavior change that we're aiming for, because ultimately that's what this is about. It's about genuine protection.
Interesting. I understand this looks at particularly the damage to the environment, which would have to be serious, widespread, and long-term, as opposed to addressing damage that happens as a result of lack of foresight or precaution, which are both exempt from the qualification of a crime of ecocide. Is this a serious distinction, you think?
Well, I think what ecocide crime is aiming at is to kind of capture this sense of recklessness. Now, essentially, that means that somebody in the position of making decisions should have been aware of the kinds of results that would and therefore, and if they then are taking action that is likely to create that result, then effectively they're committing that crime. So it sort of brings into play the sort of public domain and scientific knowledge, which is obviously increasing all the time, around, you know, a particular field of action, and that's what sort of lifts it, if you like, to the level of a very serious crime. Now, obviously, lack of foresight, lack of precaution can still potentially incur penalties at a lesser level, but when you want to look at a serious level crime, you have to kind of have something involved where the person should have known but took action anyway, so that you can sort of effectively narrow it down to a certain level, if you like, of intent.
The Ecocide law, which is all about protecting nature, would help ensure that natural carbon sinks like forests and wetlands remain untouched by human development. But fossil fuel companies have been pushing for what they say is an alternative to dealing with our CO2 emissions, a process called carbon capture and storage.
We're too late to avoid a climate crisis, but to avert the worst, we have two options. We could seriously curb emissions, but that's something very hard to do because most economies are run by burning fossil fuels for electricity, transportation, and industry. Or we can remove CO2 at the source, and there's more than one way to go about it. Pre-combustion is pre-burning fuel slightly to remove CO2 before burning to produce fertilizer, chemical gases, and power. Post-combustion works for older power plants. It filters CO2 out of the air after burning the fossil fuel. Oxy-fuel combustion burns fossil fuels in oxygen rather than air. The byproducts are water vapor and CO2. The vapor condenses, leaving pure CO2 ready to collect. Direct air capture removes CO2 from the air using large machines. Captured CO2 doesn't just disappear. It must be kept out of the Earth's biosphere, so it's stored underground, either in deep geological formations or injected into declining oil fields, coal deposits that are too difficult to mine, saltwater aquifers, and more.
Landry Ninteretse is the Africa Managing Director at 350.org. I called him up to help us understand why carbon capture is such a divisive issue.
So, Landry, the International Energy Agency described the fossil fuel industry's reliance on carbon capture to reduce CO2 emissions as, quote, an illusion. Do you agree?
I do agree. I do agree because it's an impractical and expensive solution that doesn't contribute to reduce the burning of fossil fuels and hence emissions, and is kind of backed by technology that doesn't contribute to reduce the emissions, which is the solution to the crisis. So I'll agree with the report calling the carbon capture storage an illusion and an expensive fossil fuel solution.
Tell me what you understand about carbon capture and storage exactly. I know it is being touted as one of the possible things to do in collaboration with other things to eventually reduce our greenhouse gases. What do you understand by it exactly?
So the carbon capture storage aims to reduce the climate impact of burning fossil fuels and is a fossil fuels-backed technology. essentially processed to capture carbon dioxide pollution and transport it into a storage site. So it's kind of try to remove the carbon dioxide using unproven technologies. And this is still far from real scalability and economic feasibility. So it's, to put it simply, it's a kind of buying the permit to pollute by trying to capture the carbon dioxide and store it somewhere, instead of like avoiding the emissions of new avoiding the emissions of carbon dioxide. You capture it and you hide it, or you store it, right? And that's why it's problematic. It hasn't been kind of proven really to be what the world need in this particular moment to tackle the issue of climate change. Because in order to do so, basically what the world needs is to significantly reduce the amount of carbon dioxide being propelled in the atmosphere and produce energy based on solutions that are either low carbon intensive or that don't emit kind of emissions at all. That's the right route to go. So other kind of ways of trying to address the issue of growing emissions are kind of are an illusion, as we said, are tentative, are not proven, are expensive, and most importantly, are likely to perpetrate the same injustices that have been kind of prevailing for decades of centuries of some wealthy countries with technology kind of buying the permit to pollute. And this is wrong from an equity and justice point of view.
Yeah, from my understanding, there are like a few dozen or so operational carbon capture, utilization, and storage projects around the world. About 30 of them use carbon for enhanced oil recovery, in which carbon is injected into oil wells to free trapped oil, which of course supports your argument that the tech is likely to only be used to produce more oil. But do you think there's anything good at all in terms of storing carbon in saline aquifers or rock, basically putting it back into the ground from which it came?
I really doubt. I highly doubt there is anything good with storing that carbon. What again can help concretely is reducing and avoiding new emissions. If we are to tackle the root cause of the climate crisis, we, the world, have to find ways of avoiding kind of new pollution by reducing existing ones and avoiding releasing new amount of emissions in the atmosphere. Any other kind of techniques of capturing or storing emissions already produced might be risky and haven't proven to be the right technology to go after in this moment.
What about the direct air capture, which is fascinating to me? The idea that we can take the carbon that's already heating the planet out of the atmosphere. Is that something you'd support?
I'm not unfortunately very familiar with that, so I won't comment that air capture kind of technology. I'm sorry.
You know, not many people have a comprehensive understanding of what it takes to operate a fossil fuel company. These organizations primarily need three things: lots of money, permits, and insurance. It's the latter we focus on at the moment, because without insurance, energy companies can neither build nor operate their projects. Insurance is so instrumental, one activist described it as, quote, the Achilles heel of the fossil fuel industry.
Don't touch him like that!
This heated tussle took place outside the offices of American International Group and Chubb Group in Manhattan, New York, as dozens of environmentalists tried forcing their way into the insurance giant's headquarters.
As a hurricane survivor, as someone who lost my home and me and my 6 children were homeless due to these hurricanes, it is time out for these insurance companies and these big banks funding these projects.
The UK's controversial Public Order Act meant activists were forced to use a more subtle approach to avoid arrest. They peacefully occupied the lobbies of London's leading insurance companies, demanding public rejections of new coal, oil, and gas projects.
By financing those projects, the only thing that insurers like Talbot are ensuring is that we have a future where our climate renders the homes and health of millions uninsurable.
Fossil fuel insurance is a billion-dollar industry. Firms in the US hold $500 billion worth of financial assets in the sector. And companies operating in London's insurance market are among the world's largest investors, collectively funneling $2 billion in annual premiums. But climate change is exacting a significant cost on their capital. In 2023, firms experienced staggering financial losses to the tune of $123 billion due to climate-related disasters. To protect themselves, some have stopped covering homes in California, Florida, Louisiana, and in parts of Australia because of their vulnerability to flooding, wildfires, and hurricanes. But one high-profile project known as the East Africa Crude Oil Pipeline is at the center of a battle between environmentalists and fossil fuel tycoons. It is set to be the longest pipeline in the world, with more than 1,400 kilometers running from Uganda to Tanzania, some of which has already been laid. Environmental groups like PowerShift Africa say the project is already endangering the region's biodiversity and coastal ecosystems. French oil giant Total Energies, along with China's National Offshore Oil Corporation, are seeking insurance from multinational companies before oil can be supplied to global markets. But so far, 28 insurance companies have steered clear of it, in part because of the significant environmental and human rights risks.
We particularly target the financial pillars of the fossil fuel industry, because without finance, without insurance, without bank loans, without investments, none of these projects would go forward or could continue to operate.
Our future, not fossil fuels.
Demonstrations are gaining momentum. Activists believe they can put enough pressure on the insurance sector to end their support of oil and gas projects entirely.
So, Etienne, Extinction Rebellion has called insurance companies the quote Achilles heel of the fossil fuel industry. Is the insurance industry that powerful?
Well, we believe it is. We are calling on these insurance companies. They've got the potential to be heroes in this time of climate and nature emergency. Insurance has a unique power because without insurance, fossil fuel expansion projects cannot go ahead. They need permits, they need legislation, and they need insurance. And we know that insurance companies could choose actually to not insure some of these huge projects. And we know already that many are seeing the risks here. And insurance is an interesting industry, right? Because they are all about assessing the risks in the future and trying to understand what will come to be. And it seems to us completely, and to many people of the public, actually, as we explain this and expose this situation, completely insane that they are actually insuring projects that will destroy our planet's ability to support life and render the planet uninsurable, collapsing the insurance industry as well as destroying, the lives of millions of people. So it seems like a really good story to explain and a really interesting thing to expose so that people understand what's going on.
The Net Zero Alliance is formed by the UN with many leading insurance companies committing to the transitioning of their investments to net zero GHG emissions by 2050. You talked about the industry being heroes. Do they want to be? Do you get the impression that these insurance companies are willing to prioritize risk, as you said, over profits?
Well, I think there's a spectrum, and be sure about is that a lot of the projects that we're really focusing on, for example, the East African crude oil pipeline, The Adani Carmichael mine, that's already been ruled out by many people. ECOP, as it's known, is still, insurers are still in the frame for that. We have the West Cumbria coal mine here in the UK, Trans Mountain X pipeline, you know, all this fine talk about policies and this, that, and the other. Actually, if those projects go ahead, we call these carbon bomb projects, because if they go ahead, they can, if several of them go ahead, they literally render the chances of step 5 degrees in the longer term completely, you know, impossible. So these carbon bomb projects need not to be insured, and these insurers can step up and choose to pull away. And the interesting thing is that what gives us a great deal of hope is that as each insurance company pulls away, it raises the risk and raises the premium. And so it means that, in fact, what could happen is that these projects become uninsurable because the financial cost, it does not balance out with the rewards. And we already know that these projects are very risky very often anyway. And as more and more companies choose to do the right thing, it means that these projects could get stopped. And that's a fantastic idea and a fantastic proposition that we are really pursuing.
Extinction Rebellion is arguably the largest climate group in the world. Have you guys been able to get a conversation with any insurance company? If so, what was their response to you?
I mean, Extinction Rebellion here is acting in amongst as partners with the Insure Our Futures Coalition, which is 130 groups worldwide in 30 countries operating in this entire week, you know, a whole week of action. And we, Extinction Rebellion, took the decision to write to the insurance companies. I'm afraid I don't actually know. I believe a couple have responded somewhat defensively, and I guess we're going to see what happens, how that conversation can progress. But I can say that on the streets, as it were, in the last 2 days, we've been having excellent conversations. We're having actually what's called an insurers assembly. So we're inviting people from the insurance industry to come and have talk, deliberate and process what could be done in this situation. And we're doing that in a very safe and anonymous way so that we can really start to move the conversation inside these companies, because we know a lot of people in there will be aware of these risks, but there's that kind of organizational inertia. There's the hierarchies of, you know, power that's, you know, kind of slow these things down. But we're hoping to open this conversation. And I think, you know, we obviously, of course, people were a bit grumpy here and there, and some people were, you know, angry, but actually we were handing out leaflets. We handed out all our leaflets on Tuesday, for example, completely, and handed them out. And we're having conversations with insurance and people behind the scenes, I think, will be thinking, actually, there is a point here. And, you know, these companies are sensitive to reputational risk as well. You know, they don't want to be seen as the reckless people insuring things that people know are not sensible, because that actually affects them overall. So there's a really strong possibility here. We believe this is winnable. The Insure Our Futures Coalition has put a lot of thought and a lot of clever research into this, and I'm really excited, and I know a lot of our movement is very energized by this.
Etienne, protest action in the UK has been limited extensively by this Public Order Act. Is this hindering what you want to say and how you want to say it?
We're seeing even today, Rishi Sunak is really hamming up, might I say, the idea of mob rule, and this is also in relation to the genocide and in Gaza that's going on, and the public response to that, which has been huge and peaceful in this country. And we know Extinction Rebellion dedicated to non-violent direct action, and what we really see is a very political suppression of our rights to protest. Extinction Rebellion, because we're deeply motivated and strongly motivated by climate justice and try to protect the future of our planet and all life on it, we have to find ways of making our voices heard despite these restrictions. And a lot of brave people are still out. We are adopting more creative, fun ways of doing things. I don't know if you saw, we're going to have clowns, we've got performances. We're trying to do things in a also, we recognize that, you know, there is going to be legal risk, but we work to inform ourselves of that, and we look to try to push the situation as far as we can and as far as people want to, because the message has to get through, and that's what these politicians unfortunately just simply don't understand. We will not be scared off saying what we do. What we're saying is too important to stay at home.
And that is the show. But before I leave you, animal traffickers target animals in Colombia's rainforest for many reasons, including for meat, their skin and fur, and even to sell them to people who try to domesticate them. But the Santa Cruz Zoo in Cundinamarca has been rescuing and rehabilitating animals that fall prey to this illegal practice.
And I probably should thank you, but I find it hard to say, 'cause I'm sad that you're the one who got away. The one that got the one that got the one that got I still remember the moment when our eyes met. I was nervous on the surface, but you made it all okay. Though it was just a moment, you always had to part. I wish you didn't leave holding my heart. And I probably should thank you, but I find it hard to say, 'cause I'm sad that you're the one who got away. The one that got